Part 6. In the Creek. Previously on Ghost Creek. Penny Thompson returned to her family farm after her father died suddenly. Penny is haunted by memories of her mother, who died of cancer when Penny was a teenager, and the tragic death of her brother Eric in a car accident. Penny was resigned to the plan of selling the farm to the town of Westfield, which had made a deal with Penny's father to keep the land undeveloped in exchange for a monthly payment. But before Penny could sign the deal and go back to the city, she and her old high school sweetheart, Chuck Foreman, now a sheriff's deputy, discovered a body buried in the embankment of the creek out by the cow pasture. Based on letters to Eric and Eric's suicide note, Penny and Chuck concluded that the body had been Oliver Epstein, who was Eric's lover, and that Eric's death was no accident. Who murdered Oliver, and why, was still a mystery. Meanwhile, Chuck arranged for a crew of high school students he supervised in a summer detention program to help Penny plant the pumpkin field. Penny still thought she would be selling the farm, but worried about the land being turned into an industrial development. Penny and Chuck talked about the future of the farm while walking by the creek, swollen with runoff from an earlier storm. Penny slipped in the mud and fell into the rushing water, churning toward a culvert under the road that empties as a waterfall on the other side, above a treacherous tangle of fallen trees. Part 6. In the Creek. Chuck ran along the stream edge, calling Penny's name and watching her as her head bobbed above the frothing water momentarily for a breath. Her fingers scratched at the muddy bank, unable to find a grip. Chuck scanned the creek's path down to the roadway, searching for a branch or a vine he might use as a lifeline, but the pasture offered only grass and the occasional wildflower. Gasping for air and choking on gulps of water, Penny was disoriented. The rushing water tossed her sideways as she struggled to find the surface amid the maelstrom. She knew the peril awaiting on the far side of the road. She needed to find something to stop her, or at least slow her down. Would Chuck try to dive in to save her? He might, but only if he could get ahead of her. Grabbing blindly for anything, a rock, a branch, a now submerged bush, she flailed her arms, but the relentless water pulled her onwards. Only white water and flashes of sunlight filled her vision. She tried to scan the horizon for Chuck, but could not find him in her fleeting patches of sight. How far had she been swept downstream? She had no point of reference. Without warning, a stabbing pain rocked Penny's elbow. The metal edge of the hulking culvert. She forced her aching arm to keep contact with the mouth of the tube as her skin scraped off. Clutching with her fingers, she grasped for the edge, finding a slippery hold. She swung the other arm toward the unseen boundary, reaching with all her might against the flowing water's massive force. She grasped the edge with both hands, pulling herself to the surface. Her whole body was stretched out into the tunnel, but the sunlight still stabbed at her eyes, along with the rushing water, effectively blinding her. She tried to call out for Chuck, but her voice was garbled by the water. Kicking her feet and pulling with all her remaining strength, she could not make herself move forward against the current. She could barely keep her grip. Would Chuck be able to get to her? Would he drown with her if he tried? Then she heard his voice. "Pen! Hang on!" Knowing Chuck was there somewhere gave her more strength. A slap across her face made Penny blink as she spat water. "Grab on!" Chuck's voice seemed distant over the rushing in her ears. A flash of blue dangled in her field of vision. To grab it, she had to let go with one hand. She pulled forward, inhaling, then let go with her right hand and groped toward the object, grabbing the soft, wet cloth. The pant leg of Chuck's blue jeans. She clamped with all the strength in her fingers. Her left hand slipped, sending her falling backward into the merciless flowing water. Still clutching at the denim lifeline, she kicked her feet and fought to keep her head above water. Swiping her left arm toward anything that might give her a handhold, Penny felt something rough and round. A tree branch, perhaps. She grabbed it and stopped her backward movement. Penny felt the lifeline pulling her forward against the current. She let go with her left hand, allowing Chuck to pull her toward the culvert's mouth. As Penny's left hand scraped along the tree branch she had been gripping, her fingers unexpectedly found an object, smooth and hard. She held on, feeling a tacky surface under her thumb, like a rubber handle. Whatever it was, she thought, it might help her push against the culvert's scalloped walls. She pulled it free and stabbed at her aluminum prison, feeling solid contact and hearing a metallic clang. She pushed against the wall while the lifeline continued to pull her forward. Slowly, she made progress. The mouth of the tube was closer, yet she struggled for air. The metal tool clanged again against the metal tube above the waterline. Then her head emerged from the tunnel. She gripped the wet denim as her torso lifted from the stream. She gulped the air, still holding fast to her cloth line with her right hand. Her feet, now shoeless, scraped against the metal lip, then gripped. She stood at the edge of the opening, then felt a strong hand grasp her arm and pull her up. Moments later, a spluttering Penny lay in the soft grass on the creek edge, a few feet from the culvert. Chuck, stripped down to his boxer shorts, knelt next to her. Chuck's soaked blue jeans, hanging at the end of his black belt, lay on the ground nearby. After regaining her breath and composure, Penny sat up and leaned into Chuck's solid torso, oblivious to her aching arms and legs. "Thank you," she croaked out. "Next time you want to go swimming, let's go to the lake. Deal?" Penny laughed, then coughed. "Deal." "What is that?" Chuck pointed with his free hand at the black rubber grip still clenched in Penny's left hand. She held it up, covered with rust. It was a hammer. Penny studied it in the low sunlight. "I think I've seen this guy before." Penny and Chuck staggered back to the farmhouse. Chuck found a pair of Farmer Thompson's shorts and a dry shirt, while Penny toweled off and changed into fresh jeans. After grabbing Cokes from the fridge, a still shaking Penny led the way to the barn. In her father's workshop, she held up the hammer retrieved from the culvert. On the pegboard above the workbench, Gary Thompson's impeccably organized tools stood at attention, awaiting a project that would never be started. 3 hammers of varying sizes hung from their claws. Next to the largest, a gap marked the place where the next in the size sequence should have been. Penny reached up and hung the rusted hammer, its black grip partly disintegrated and stained, but matching the size and shape of the others. She hung it on the peg in the blank space, where it fell neatly into place, completing the set. Then she grabbed it back, holding it at her side. "Looks like that hammer's been missing for a while," Chuck stated the obvious. "Nothing gets by your keen police-trained eyes, huh?" "It takes years of experience." Penny opened a drawer with a shaking hand and placed the rusty hammer inside. It didn't belong on the pegboard in its sullied condition. Seeing her trembling after nearly drowning in the creek, Chuck put an arm gently around her shoulders. "Do you want me to stay here with you tonight? I'll sleep in the barn if you like." Penny leaned into him and encircled his waist with an arm. "I'd rather you stay in the house, on the sofa." Chuck called in the next morning to take a vacation day so he could look after Penny. They both slept late, then spent some time in the barn working on the old tractor. Penny was still shaken by her escape from the creek, but the activity was therapeutic. Installing the new starter proved to be trickier than they expected, but they kept at it. In the early afternoon, the real estate agent, Arthur Madden, arrived at the farm. Penny wanted to send him away, or tell Duke to bite him, but Chuck said it would be best to hear what he had to say.
Better to have the information. You don't have to agree to anything. You already know the mayor was lying, so just assume everyone is trying to steal from you.
Penny invited Madden inside, but didn't offer him a drink. Sitting rigidly with her arms crossed, she said,
"I'm listening."
"Miss Thompson,"
Madden smiled like the salesman he was,
"I'm leaving town today. I'm not here to offer you more money. The amount on the table is quite fair, as you probably know if you've spoken to any of the local agents, which I assume you have."
He paused, waiting for Penny to affirm or deny her level of education on the subject of Westfield farmland property values. When she said nothing, he plowed ahead.
"I'm going to need an answer from you, as I told you. The offer will be withdrawn if you don't accept."
Penny waited a full minute before speaking, watching Madden sweat in his red blazer.
"If I take your offer, what will happen to the farm?"
"That's up to my clients,"
Madden answered smoothly.
"And who are your clients again? Oh, that's right, you can't tell me. So, it's likely they'll turn the land into either a housing development or commercial property, but there's no possibility it will stay a farm. Is that accurate?"
"I really can't say."
Madden reached a hand toward the necktie he wasn't wearing, as if he was planning to loosen it. Chuck, who had his best poker face on during the discussion, put his arms on the table and leaned forward.
"Would you buy if Penny put a restriction in the deed, requiring the farm to remain undeveloped?" "Well, no. My clients would not agree to any restrictions."
"Of course not. Which means Penny is 100% right. Nobody pays that much without planning to make more. You can't make that kind of money working this land as a farm. If your clients are willing to pay $1 million, then they expect to make $5 million, which means they are not walking away. So, you tell them Miss Thompson will make a decision when she's good and ready. We just planted the pumpkins in the north field. The local kids will be picking them in October, like always. Nobody is coming in here to bulldoze this farm before then. Am I right, Penny?"
"Right." Penny sat back in her chair, then recrossed her arms.
"Is that your final decision?"
Madden looked at Chuck, not Penny.
"My final decision,"
Penny waved her hand to get the man to look in her direction,
"is that I haven't made a decision. You will have to wait, and your clients will have to wait. If that means there's no deal, then so be it."
Madden slowly rose and picked up his briefcase.
"Very well, Miss Thompson."
He tipped an imaginary hat, then let himself out, Duke sniffing along at his heels. 15 minutes later, Penny drained her Coke. Leaning back, empty glass in hand, words poured out that she had kept bottled up for years. The near drowning had produced dark dreams the night before. If she had died on the jagged limbs of the trees under the waterfall, her entire family would have died on the farm.
"It's like a nightmare I can't wake up from. It was so different when Mom was alive. When she got sick, everything changed. She died upstairs in her bed. We were all here. I know Dad was always disappointed in me and Eric, but it was like, without Mom, he couldn't hold himself in."
"Wait."
Chuck held up a hand.
"Your dad was disappointed in you? You were great. Why would anyone be not totally proud of you?"
"Well, start with the fact that Dad always wanted a son. When he got me instead, he settled for teaching me how to drive the tractor and work with the tools. He didn't react well when I hit puberty and started acting like a girl."
"By that time, though, Eric was old enough, right?"
Penny dropped her head and took another long sip of wine.
"Dad was much more disappointed in Eric than he ever was with me. While Mom was alive, she kept him in line. I never told you that he beat Eric.
What?
Uh-huh. When Eric didn't do something right, Dad would slap him. When Eric tried to push back, Dad hit him. Hard. Mom and I tried to keep Eric out of Dad's way, but sometimes we couldn't. Eric never liked working the farm or learning how to maintain the equipment. He couldn't drive a nail to save his life. Dad kept insisting that he try, and then was pissed off when he failed. It was tough on Mom. She was so depressed after she got sick. When she was in bed, she could hear Eric screaming when Dad hit him. I couldn't stop him without her.
Penny choked back a sob, and a tear slithered down her cheek.
Oh, Pen, why didn't you tell me?
Chuck moved his chair so he could hold her hand.
I could have helped you and Eric.
Penny shook her head and wiped the moisture from her face.
No, Chuck. I know you think so, and you might have tried, but there was nothing anybody could do.
Well, you could have...
No.
Penny pulled her hand away.
I thought about all the options. Mom and I talked. The police and the social workers wouldn't have been able to do anything. We didn't want Eric to get sent away to foster care or something. That would have been worse. No local cop was going to arrest Dad. Then, after Mom died, Dad got withdrawn for a while. He drank a lot and spent hours alone in his workshop. But after a while, it started again.
Was that when we were dating?
Yeah, some of it. Then I went off to college. Eric said he would be able to keep it together for 2 years until he graduated and could leave home, but...
He crashed his car.
Eric finished the thought. Penny looked into Chuck's face.
You knew he was gay, right?
Chuck turned away and scratched the back of his head.
I guess I did. We all figured he might be, but nobody was ever sure. Not like he was obvious about it.
I know. He didn't want people to know. Folks around here are not the most tolerant.
Chuck didn't contradict her.
After I left for college, Eric told Dad he was gay. Dad couldn't handle it. You know how men from his generation are. He thought he was a failure as a father, but Eric told me Dad stopped hitting him for a while. Then, a few months before he died, Eric said he had a friend who came to visit. He never told me the boy's name. Afterwards, Eric was upset because his friend stopped talking to him. No phone calls, no texts, no IMs, nothing. He ghosted Eric, and Eric was devastated. Then, he died in the crash. I never put it together. That boy must have been Oliver Epstein. Eric was so upset, and who knows what Dad did or said after Oliver's visit. So, Eric killed himself.
Your father said it was an accident.
Dad might have believed that. I didn't find Eric's note until now. He thought Dad drove Oliver away from him. He didn't want to be alone.
Chuck paused.
So, you think during Oliver's visit, or maybe at the end, somebody took a hammer from your father's workbench, killed Oliver with it, threw the hammer into the culvert, probably expecting it to end up at the bottom of the pool on the other side, and then buried Oliver by the creek?
Penny didn't respond, not wanting to voice her affirmation.
What are you going to do with the hammer?
Penny leaned into Chuck's warmth.
What hammer?